I'd like to start this talk with a poem by M. Truman Cooper. Suppose what you fear could be trapped and held in Paris. Then you would have the courage to go everywhere in the world, all the directions of the compass open to you except the degrees east or west of true north that lead to Paris. Still, you wouldn't dare to put your toes smack dab on the city limit line. And you're not really willing to stand on a mountainside miles away and watch the Paris lights come up at night. And just to be on the safe side, you decide to stay completely out of France. But then danger seems too close even to those boundaries, and you feel the timid part of you covering the whole globe again. You need the kind of friend who learns your secret and says, "See Paris first." So I like that poem a lot because I feel like it points to a critical inquiry that I feel that many of us are on a path of waking up, which is, what is our way of relating to difficulty or fear? What's our pattern? When we encounter stressors, when we feel a sense of agitation, what happens next? Do we try to kind of package it up and put it away somewhere, or fix it or get rid of it? Or do we have some wise part of us, an inner friend, saying, "See Paris first"? So in this class, I'd like to explore the role of stress in the evolution of consciousness, and really how relating to stress can directly serve our spiritual awakening. And I remember years ago, I was in a teacher training group with Jack Kornfield, and one of perhaps the youngest teacher in the group, asked him a question which was really what would help her deepen in her teaching, really come from the most profound and wise place in her teaching. And he looked at her and he kind of smiled and he said, "Just more suffering." And really the understanding is, and it's for each of us, is that it's often through encountering the inevitable losses, and they are inevitable, the inevitable challenges, it's through those times that our hearts and our wisdom wake up. And the phrase I've used in the past from Thich Nhat Hanh that I think captures it way better than any others is, "No mud, no lotus," right? Remember that, some of you? Now, that phrase is on t-shirts and jewelry. You check it out on the internet. It's pretty funny. But I think it's a wonderful understanding. So I want to kind of dive deeper into this. And you see this in the principles that come through the Four Noble Truths in Buddhism, that in the most simple way, you might say that stress is another word for dukkha. Dukkha is sometimes called suffering, but it's really uneasiness, dissatisfaction, stress. It's that tension that we experience in our lives. And so the first noble truth is that stress is absolutely universal. Hand in hand with being a life form is experiencing stress. The second noble truth is that stress increases and it locks in. It becomes what we might call suffering in the moments that we react to it with grasping and aversion. Okay? So that's truth number 2. Truth number 3 is that it is possible for us to respond to stress in a way that actually enables us to flower, to more fully unfold ourselves. That's a possibility, to really experience our full potential. And then the fourth noble truth is really, here's how. Here's the way of living aligned with your truth, of deepening your attention, widening your attention, that actually will enable you to, when the stressors come, actually grow through them, wake up through them, like the lotus, flower through them. So those are the Four Noble Truths, and what's really exciting these days for many people is that a lot of the research Western science is really kind of showing a lot of what the mystics have described over the eons. And evolutionary science has got a beautiful parallel with the Noble Truths. And then from an evolutionary perspective, stress or fear or wanting or tension is information that moves all of us organisms to survive, to adapt, to continue transforming in the face of inevitable change. So stress turned our fins into arms, and stress changes the shape and size of beaks for some creatures and trains many in the arts of deception. The opposable thumb, that's from stress. And of course, for humans, on our human evolutionary path, we're real puny compared to other creatures, so we were having a hard time. So stress evolved our massive frontal cortex so we could strategize and plan and outwit other creatures on the planet, and outwit ourselves by destroying the planet in the process, of course. But our frontal cortex, representational thinking, telling stories, being able to sense the future, being able to have an idea of the future and the past, and therefore be strategic. And along with that comes a sense of the story of ourself. So part of the pattern of evolution is that at every new phase that ends up addressing stress at a lesser stage, there's new problems that come up, new stressors that challenge further growth. And of course, the stressors that come up for most of us humans have to do with the egoic layer, that we have this thinking mind that's very, most often, fear thinking, and that most often the fear thinking has to do with what's wrong with us and what's wrong with others and creates pain and separation. So that's the stress most of us are dealing with. Most people, many are dealing with more fundamental levels of stress, of, fear of survival in war situations or hunger. So I'm not in any way minimizing that, but many of us are dealing with the psychological level. And that comes from the storytelling mind. That comes from the obsessive fear-based thinking. So that's the stress that comes up with us. And a lot of time it's a stress it's the mud, but it doesn't produce a lotus. We end up reacting to it and causing ourselves more stress. So how does that happen? Just if we look at it for any one of us. Okay, so we have our daily stressors of feeling our finances squeezed, the fear of a bad job performance evaluation, or failing health. And there's, rather than just the immediate survival stuff, we start telling stories around it. So how do we react to that stress? Well, for most of us, when we encounter stress, we very quickly go into blaming ourselves or blaming the world, blaming someone else. A lot of judgment and a lot of obsessing. Story I heard years ago, a woman leaving a retreat, and she was having to switch planes at an airport, and so she put all her stuff down and got a small package of cookies, sat down at a table where she had the morning paper, and she was kind of reading, and then she was aware of some rustling at the table. And then behind her paper, she was flabbergasted to see a neatly dressed young man helping himself to one of her cookies. She didn't want to make a scene, so she leaned across and took a cookie herself. A minute or so passed, more rustling. He was helping himself to another cookie. So by the time they were down to the last cookie in the packet, she was really angry, but still couldn't bring herself to say anything. Then the young man broke the cookie in two, pushed half across to her, ate the other half, and left. It was sometime later when the public address system called her to her gate, and she was asked to present her ticket. She reaches into her bag, and she's confronted by her package of cookies. She had been eating his. We live in ideas about the world, and we react off of those ideas. And there is, underneath our stress reaction, there's a story, and it's an ego-based story, because we're living in this idea of a self, and the story is, underneath all stressors, something bad is happening to me or caused by me. Okay, something bad, something I don't like. And either I'm bad and wrong or you're bad and wrong. And then what happens is those thoughts keep looping into feelings of aversion or guilt or anger or whatever, which then produce more thoughts, and we're caught in a stress loop. Okay? So this is again when it's mud but no lotus, right? Because a stress loop keeps us feeling like a separate, deficient, egoic self. We're stuck at that level of evolution. Okay? I'll give you an example. Recently talking to a parent of one teen, his son would act in ways that were very rude and disrespectful, and then be very withdrawn, not forthcoming. And so he was in a chronic state, the father, of feeling offended and angry, and under-offended, hurt. And so his primary response was, in some way, he just couldn't stop himself from saying, this kid's wrong, he's off, he's bad, something's wrong with him. And then he'd react in a way that would communicate that, and the son would be more withdrawn or more rude. And so that's a very common cycle people get into. And as part of it, he'd be blaming himself, because part of him knew he was the adult and he should be able to see past the mask and be more big-hearted and compassionate and know his kid was in trouble. But that was his emotional response, and that was his thought pattern. Something's wrong here, you're wrong. And then even the feelings of I'm bad made him more frustrated, and he would take it out on his son. So they were looping. And that loop represents what I think is a great equation for suffering, which is that stress, the feeling of offendedness, the feeling of anger, times resistance. The resistance is, rather than just feel that, we react, equals suffering. Stress or pain times resistance equals suffering. It's a pseudo, faux kind of equation, but it's really, really powerful to understand that. That when we get triggered, if we then add on a story of blame, a judgment, a reactivity, we're kind of resisting the experience of the moment, and that creates more suffering. I also sometimes think of it as double dukkha, because there's the dukkha of feeling offended and there's an angry, and then when we add on the judgment, we lock into a deeper sense of not okay self. It's been described in Buddhist psychology as the second arrow. There's one bad feeling, we add on judgment, it nails it shut. We get locked in. So what we get locked into with this mud no lotus is a deepened sense of an egoic self. Rather than adapting to stress and evolving past an egoic self, we're locked in. So then we get to the question, okay, we know with the third noble truth that when stress comes, we have the possibility of responding in a way that evolves us. And I'd like to call that, or describe that in the opposite equation, which is stress times presence equals evolution. We evolve, we transform. Stress times resistance equals suffering, stress times presence equals growing. So all of this goes to say, the key to this whole thing of how we work with stress is our view of it. And that our habit is to think when we're stressed, when we're feeling tension, when we're feeling pain, when we're feeling anger, that something is wrong. That's our habit. Not that this is information that if I respond to it, actually will evolve me, actually will help transform me. It's a critical shift in view to not make wrong what's happening in our lives. Anything. I know that's a big statement, but not to make it wrong, because it's all stress, it's all dukkha in some way. In the moment we make it wrong, we're on the path of double dukkha. mud but no lotus.